What's up everyone, Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick and I have an album review for you. So another one that came out that I definitely wanted to go over was the newest offering from Haunt, Windows of Your Heart. This again comes out on the 1st of July. This is actually an independent release, or at least maybe under Church Recordings, because this is a one-man show essentially. Trevor William Church has been doing Haunt for a long time. It started off as a solo project. He does have like a touring group of musicians and occasionally other musicians on his albums, but for the most part, it is just him. Now, this band formed in Fresno, California in 2017. This is their 8th full-length overall, and Trevor is a very prolific writer and recorder. He does all the stuff himself outside of the drums, which I believe might be programmed on this. I'm not entirely sure. It was kind of hard to get a reading on that. But he does have a drummer he works with frequently, at least in his other band, Beastmaker, which that's also pretty damn prolific too. Just check out the number of fucking EPs those guys have released. But Andres Alejandro Saldante, I believe, might be doing the drums on here. It was kind of hard to find out if he was actually on here. It pretty much had Trevor listed as everything on here outside of drums, so I assume it was him or Drum Machine. Someone out there is bound to know for sure, but I'm gonna guess it's a real drummer, but it could be a drum machine. I don't know, drum machines sound pretty good when you want them to occasionally. Now, I have been a fan of Haunt for a while. Actually, I got into them on their awesome fucking debut, Burst Into Flame. I thought that was really cool and was kind of part of a little wave of like retro trad metal that was coming out. Bands like Enforcer kind of just playing like old school heavy metal, like very akin to, of course, early Iron Maiden, I would say Scorpions and Judas Priest, Angel Witch, any number of those bands, definitely paying homage to those, but also putting out some cool fresh tunes. And Haunt was definitely in that mix, still very much are. And I wanted to check out this one because Haunt's been pretty consistent, especially in terms of releases. Shred and I actually went over their album Mind Freeze, and it was pretty damn good. And I covered, I think, their last one in a collection update, and I thought it was pretty decent as well. So, of course, I wanted to get into this one, and right from the rip, I kind of like the energy that is presented right away. The song Mercenaries, which I believe was a lead-off single, comes out of the gate very thrashy. Like, you have a sample of what sounds like World War II planes, possibly like a kamikaze crash or something like that, and then boom, you're into like galloping thrashy riffs. Trevor's trying to do some slightly more aggressive vocals, like there's a little bit more grit to them. The riffs are very machine gun driven, but of course this is classic heavy metal, so you have tons of cool harmonies, scorching lead work, and some 80s synths in the background, which the synths in here are kind of interesting because sometimes they're in the background, sometimes they take the forefront, and I don't know, they're used very cleverly for the most part, but sometimes it's just very jarring. But overall, it works with the whole vibe. I mean, the whole vibe is definitely like, well, 80s. It's definitely 80s, kind of a mix between like early 80s and mid 80s in terms of just the style. Like there's definitely the straightforward, like mid-tempo rockers that you would associate with like Dio and Ozzy, just in terms of like, you know, this is accessible metal. It's a little bit more hooky. It's not fast and flying like those fucking crazy thrash kids and their fucking high tops, but it's also not like aquanetted and power balladed to death like, you know, the hair metal scene. So it's kind of like an in-between there. And you can definitely hear that in songs like Father Time and Catch Me. Those both kind of just ramp up the 80s energy, give you a nice mid-tempo stomp, great riffs. And something they do exceptionally well across this entire album is, holy shit, the bridges are absolutely fantastic. Some of the best riffs and melodies come at the bridge, and I don't know what it is about the bridge, but all of a sudden Trevor just unlocks these absolutely killer, infectious melodies and then scorches an awesome melodic lead across it. Frozen in Time, Running Hard, Barricade, these all have just incredible bridges that just kind of make good use of every possible cool harmony you could throw in there, every infectious little lick, every cool 80s solo you could throw in. It really became kind of the theme on this album where the biggest hooks were on the bridge. And that isn't to say there aren't hooks on the verse riffs or the choruses, but when it came down to like those holy shit epic moments where you're like, whoa, that's fucking awesome, it's definitely the bridge. Now, while there is like just a little bit of thrash on here, again, especially songs like Catch Me, which is a very energetic, riffy song, and definitely makes use of some more aggressive riffing. Same with No Control, which I thought has a nice kind of galloping pace, and that's a good point in the album where the thrash kind of returns a bit because you get a lot of the 80s rockers in between that and the opening track. But the overall feel of this album is it's very major chord driven. And with major chords, you kind of get a poppier sound. So a lot of this feels very, I don't know if happy is the right word, but very pleasant and accessible, and maybe just a little bit of cheese on there. But it's a fun cheese. It's like a nice smoked Gouda because it's aged well. Well, for the most part. Sometimes it just gets to be a little bit much. And this is kind of formulaic in the sense that it is latched onto one particular sound in terms of an era. So in order to maintain this sound, there's only so much stuff you can really throw in there before you're kind of leaving it behind. And there are some songs that do experiment a little bit more, but it's experimenting almost kind of outside of heavy metal and more like hard rock and, dare I say, like 80s pop. The title track in here definitely feels more like an 80s hard rock single. Like, it has the big riffs, but there's also the pleasant, synths in the background. It's going for like a big, powerful chorus. And again, those major chord hooks that kind of sound like, hey, this was meant for the radio, maybe circa 1984. But again, it still has like a little bit of that classic rock energy. So, I mean, it's like Judas Priest, but also Cheap Trick at the same time. They're kind of working together there to write a cool little pop nugget for the radio. And the song Dream on it is not even really hiding the lush 80s sound. It opens up with the synths, and it actually sounds really cool. And then how the guitars come in and kind of play off the synth melody and make a cool harmony, it's pretty awesome. But the way the song is structured, honestly, it reminded me of like a heavy metal version of the Cars. And most people that follow my collection updates know that I fucking love the Cars. And this song definitely stood out on the entire album because it just feels different. It feels like a heavier 80s pop song. But that is not a dig at it. I think, honestly, it might be one of my favorites on here because it has such unique hooks. And the rest of the album kind of sticks to one main style of hooks. So it was kind of cool to hear a little bit of variety later on the album. And I think hooks are sort of the main thing. Maybe more along the lines of like guitar hooks, like, again, this is classic heavy metal, so you get lots of flashy harmonies and cool leads, but the riffs are very catchy. They're very infectious. Granted, you've probably heard them before in more classic stuff, but it's still done with a lot of love for this style, so it kind of comes out in the music. But this doesn't come without some issues, and some issues I've kind of always had. While I like Trevor's writing, I have never really been a huge fan of his vocals. I'm very picky when it comes down to classic heavy metal. I like hearing vocals that soar over top. They kind of have to be kind of grand, like, Bruce Dickinson, fucking Paul Di'Anno, Klaus from Scorpions. Like, you have to have someone that really soars above all those awesome fucking riffs and melodies. You need something to really complement that, to really drive the song, to make it anthemic. And often Trevor's vocals just kind of fall flat. He's just very inconsistent. Like, the opening track, Mercenaries, actually has some really good vocal hooks. And granted, I don't necessarily like his delivery very much because, again, it's not very powerful. And unfortunately, some of it reminds me of like early 2000s, like emo, like just in terms of the vocal inflection and delivery. But throwing in some harsher vocals, some grittier vocals every now and then kind of breaks that up. But it's some of the vocal harmonies that kind of get a little bit off-putting because he's harmonizing with himself and he's just kind of bringing it down a little bit to harmonize with the higher vocals, which his range definitely sounds limited, but it doesn't generate like a giant vocal hook. And that is very much missing on a lot of the choruses on here. Running Hard and Barricade really kind of suffer from this because Running Hard is pretty much just like a nice mid-tempo gallop, but then when you get down to the chorus, it just seems like all the energy is kind of sucked out of the song because it's just him essentially repeating the song title, but again, there's not much of like a melody to it. You're kind of forced to follow the riff, and then, luckily when that bridge comes on and absolutely whoops your ass, you're like, oh, that's really cool, but back to the chorus after that. And even on a really strong track like Catch Me, which I think is a solid fucking song just in terms of the riffs and the melodies, like it feels more invigorated than some of the other songs on here. But it gets down to this chorus, and again, it just doesn't really grab you. Like, it doesn't match the energy of the verses or the bridge or like how epic sounding the leads are. It just kind of falls flat, and that is kind of a thing that this album suffers from. The other thing it suffers from is a lot of this gets very repetitive. In terms of like songs that stood out, they're the ones that kind of branched out outside of just the heavy metal formula. Again, Dream on It, I think, is a very catchy song, but not necessarily the most like traditionally heavy metal song. Again, it kind of sounds like an 80s pop song. But the rest of this album kind of follows a formula of just like 80s rockers, like mid-tempo stoppers with, you know, solid riffs, but the formula gets very repetitive to the point where you can almost say like, well, this is kind of just a faster version of this song. Case in point, the last two tracks, Frozen in Time and Defender, very similar back to back. Like they kind of have the same vibe to them overall, and I was kind of hoping for like a bigger, more grand closer, because Defender is a good song, but I feel like it's a good song you've heard earlier in the album. Like I wanted to hear something a little bit more on par with like the opener being a fast thrashy track that was, you know, a little bit more lavish or a little bit more aggressive. Now, while I think the back half of this album is a little bit stronger than the front half, again, it kind of suffers from sticking to that formula too hard. And again, with, you know, vocals that don't necessarily kind of make the song really rise the occasion, this became kind of a chore to listen to after a certain point. Like, I love their debut, but honestly, as much as I like this band, I don't think they have matched up to the power of that debut. I think they've released some really good albums. Again, Mind Freeze, I think, is really good, but this one just feels like another Haunt album, and, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think the formula gets repeated way too much. For me, this album kind of has like every 80s metal trope, both good and bad. Like, when it's good, it's really awesome. Like the catchy songs are fucking fantastic. They got great energy to them. And when it's bad, well, you get like, you know, the bridge on No Control, which just throws in some woes and ohs and repeats the song title on the bridge where it should just be rocking out. I don't know, this album definitely has a lot of stuff I like on it. Like there's some cool breakdowns, there's great riffs everywhere, but there's a lot of stuff on here that I think is kind of holding it back for me to really get into it. But outside of the music, there was something I really did like in here. I believe Trevor let his kid go on there and say haunt, and I think it's just really endearing. Like, hey, your kid wants to be involved in what daddy does, and I think that's really cool. But overall, I'm gonna have to give this one 2.5 stars. There's a lot of stuff on here that I like, but it's kind of broken up by a lot of stuff that I didn't like. This band overall, I think, is really good. It's just this one, I feel like he's kind of in cruise control and he's kind of playing what's safe or what's maybe expected of him. There's some flat out killer songs that will definitely jam again, but there feels like a lot of filler and a lot of repetition on here. And I think, again, one of my big issues, and it's on every single song, regardless if it's good or bad, are the vocals. The vocals just don't seem to carry enough of a tune as much as the music does. I want to hear more that showed up on the bridges. I think the bridges on these songs are absolutely fantastic. The lead works great. I need to hear more of that because there's some real intensity that's captured on those little bridges and solos that sometimes isn't captured on the rest of the song. But that's just me. Honestly, if you dig this band, definitely check this one out. If you like Haunt in general, I'm reasonably sure you're probably gonna dig this one. And honestly, if you're a trad metal fan in general, you like that classic heavy metal sound, there's definitely gonna be some stuff in here for you. So yeah, definitely check out this album and check out any one of their other albums, because this is essentially their sound in a nutshell. But at least for me, better on earlier albums. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there'll be a link down below. We also have shirts for sale, and if you would like to get one, hit us up at thrallsmetal.com, which is also linked down below, which is why I'm pointing down there. There will also be a link down there for Denver Death Fest. I'm putting it on there knowing that it probably hasn't been updated yet because we haven't made any announcements yet, but announcements are coming soon, and we can't wait to tell you who all is going to be on this fest. For those that don't know, this festival will take place September 30th through October 2nd in Denver, Colorado, because it's Denver Death Fest, and I believe most of us will be there, and we're looking forward to coming out and fucking saying hi to you and hanging out, maybe drinking some beers and talking about how much we love metal. So yeah, we're all pretty much eagerly anticipating that one. And as always, thank you all so much for watching, subscribing, commenting, supporting, however you can. It's fucking awesome. We love that this whole little metal community is starting to grow, and it's been an awesome ride so far. I know I repeat a lot of the stuff at the end of these videos, but I mean it. This has been one of the coolest things I think I've done in my life, and I'm so happy that I get to share it with a whole bunch of fucking people that love metal too. So with that, I thank you all once again, and we will catch you later.